Alrighty, tidy folks. Today on I Have Been Incredibly Lazy, episode 3. We're going to be watching, talking about, looking at, yada, yada, yada. The last bit of the 4Runner. Don't ask me why it's taken me so long to get this last bit of footage edited. There's stuff that was missing, and then I got frustrated, and then I just didn't do things. So, we're back in the shop. I've got my handy-dandy bucket of cleaner stuff here. I didn't bring the stuff from Utah, so I had to go buy a brand new one. You see me taking off the little clipperoos there. And I was very, very smart and did not empty out some of the original fluid before I poured the Kim tool in, so I ended up spilling the stuff all over the freaking bench. Luckily, it's a steel table. It's just made of steel. I'm not ruining anything. Just mop it up with a rag later. On the last episode, we got the hubs off. We got, the front end disassembled and the control arms and things situated, ordered. We were going to press the bushings in the control arms. Tried to make a couple of tools to do that, but the part that I was using to press the bushings kept bending. The bushing would move a little bit, but then the rod would bend because of the way you have to press it. The press that he has at the shop there doesn't do the thing that I wanted it to do, and it's the movement's too sloppy, and it would have taken me a week to straighten everything out and make it capable of doing automotive work. He uses it just to press sheet into 90-degree angles is all he uses it for. So it's a machinist's press. It's a fabricator's press. It's not a machinist's or an automotive press. So we ended up just buying control arms, which we'll see here in a little bit. This first bit right here is me cleaning up the hubs and the bearings and all of this. I did this a week before we had all of the parts to put the front end all back together. Part of that was waiting for the rotors to get turned. The machine shop was a few days behind. Part of that was we needed to make the decision what he wanted to do with a couple of the parts. And part of that was the seals for that plate right there, the outer hub cap, were 3 or 4 days out at the dealership, just because getting stuff here in Sierra Vista is just kind of annoying sometimes. It takes a while because they have to ship it first to Tucson and then they ship it to Sierra Vista, so sometimes it takes an extra day to get things. Dealerships more often than part stores this happens with, but it's fine. I cleaned up the bearings and I noticed there was a little bit of damage, and when I cleaned the all the grease off of the outer rollers, I could see that they were a little bit blued. So we decided to end up going ahead and replacing all the bearings anyway. So I did want to make sure that all of the bearings were the same, that they were all slightly damaged. We can see the outer nut there. I didn't get the close-up shot that I wanted to get because my hands were all messy. I didn't want to grab the camera. Suffice it to say that the nuts somebody installed previously or removed previously with a freaking a chisel. Right? There was so much damage to those nuts, and the nuts are one-time use. The book tells you when you pull the nuts off, replace the nuts. They're $4 or something. It's nothing. There's 4 of them. There's the nut that you use to set the preload, and then there's a lock washer, and then there's a lock nut. Replace the nuts. But somebody taken what appears to have been a chisel to these nuts the last time. And there's a section in here where I'll show you the way that I do the preload on hubs like this, where you have a spindle with a threaded end and you pack the bearings, put them in the hub, put the nuts on, set the preload, and then etc., right? But this first bit here, we're cleaning, we'll stick our finger in there, get all that nasty ass grease out of there. The grease was in fine enough shape. It wasn't liquid. It hadn't overstayed its welcome, or it hadn't been destroyed. So somebody had been in there not all that long ago Some of the cotter pins, I think I mentioned it before, were wrong, and some of them looked newer-ish. The thing had sat for 5 or 6 years before he got his hands on it, because they'd blown the engine. There was a rod knock, so they did something to it. They did a bunch of work to it, and then they started up, and there was a rod knock, so they just kind of left it. They parked it and they left it. So he went and grabbed it and brought it down, stuck his 4-cylinder in there, and yeah, now we have a 4Runner to work on. It also had looked like the, you can see me scraping the gaskets off the outer bit of the hub there. It had looked like the gaskets had been reused because of kind of the way they were torn and leaking a little bit on the face of the hub. I'm not sure if that's the case. Maybe they were just older. But given the way that the age of the grease, I don't know that... I can tell you this, the preload on those hubs was completely wrong. There was no preload. I literally pulled them off, like, I mean, you saw it in the last video, right? Where I just kind of like spun them off pretty easily. They had also reused the lock washer, which again, it's like $2 or $3 at the dealership. Go and get a brand new lock washer. It's not that hard. I don't understand sometimes the things people do to their cars, the things people do to their machines. Any kind of machine. It doesn't even have to be a car. I've seen people do things to bicycles and to computers and to TVs and to refrigerators and to doors and walls and light switches and like all kinds of stuff. People do just... it makes me shake my head and wonder how we've survived as a species for so long sometimes. But that is neither here nor there. That's not why we're here watching a video. We're here to watch me clean some stuff. You can see it there. I just got to get the last little chunky bits of the gasket off of the outer face of the hub. It's kind of annoying because the studs are fixed in the hub. Yeah, I could pull the studs out probably, put 2 nuts on there and thread them out, and it'd probably be fine. And then it'd be easier to just like face the hub, which would be honestly kind of the best way to go about it. Maybe, I don't know, get that Jim Gavin thing going on there. But I got in there with a screwdriver and a razor blade and a pocket knife, and it's steel, so there's not a huge chance of me screwing up the surface with my, Chinese steel pocket knife. So we got all of the little gasket stuff off of the hubs, and we set the hubs to the side, and we waited 3 days for parts. The bearings, I think, were actually in town. The bearings were easy. But the gasket, the nuts, and the lock washer, we had to wait for all of those. But I'll reiterate, I've said it a dozen times before. Any job worth doing, worth overdoing, or any job worth doing is worth doing the correct way. What does it take you? An extra 10 minutes to clean the freaking hubs off? Maybe 10 minutes a piece? Just clean the hubs. Like, clean the whole thing. It's fine. Here, unpacking the brand new bearings, and I was talking about, you guys know me, I ramble. I was just rambling, showing you the how you check your parts. You set your new part up against your old part, and you make sure they're dimensionally the same. If the dimensions are not critical, it doesn't matter. You don't need to do that. You just need to make sure that it looks the same, or it functions the same, or whatever the critical part of the device you're using is. You verify that it functions, does the same thing. For bearings, it's dimensional. So here I wanted to show you guys just the old school way of packing a bearing. And this one actually kind of hurt my knuckle because the inner race was just the right size, that it was too big for 2 fingers, but too small for 3 fingers. So you see my fingers are kind of scrunched up there, but you want to hold the bearing nice and steady, nice and flat. And I've seen people, when they pack bearings this way, the old school way, the manual way, they just sit there and like smack the crap out of a big glob of grease on their hand, and they grab a whole bunch of grease every time they do that. You don't need to do that. You do it, look at that, just the little tiny bit. You grab the little tiny bit, you scoop a little bit of grease off the face onto the side of your hand, and you just Smack it till it comes out the top. Bam-a-lam, just like that. And then you rotate the bearing a little bit, and then you do it again. And then you rotate the bearing a little bit, and then you do it again. And I think this whole process for all 4 bearings took me 15 minutes to pack all 4 bearings. And you get these people, they're like, oh, we gotta go out and buy this like $40 tool, and you put a grease gun on it, and then you have a bunch of grease in the middle that's not actually in the bearing, that is no longer in your tube of grease in the grease gun, and it's still a mess. And they're like, oh, it's cleaner. It really isn't. I've personally never met the bearing greasing tool that was so much easier and nicer and neater to use than just greasing the bearing by hand, or that saved me that much time than greasing the bearing by hand, that I absolutely had to have it. Like, honestly, it's something about the tactile sensation, right? There's something about knowing that you put the grease in and you saw the grease come out and you know that bearing is packed. There's something about that, right? So, you know, I showed you the first one. Ain't no point in sitting through 20 minutes of all the rest of them while I do it and wash my hands off, right? That'd be kind of pointless. So we sped up the 3/4 part of the tail end of this and me doing the other bearings. Also for the sake of video length. You can see there my fingers are starting to get a little bit strained and stressed, so I'm gonna take a break every now and then. The smaller bearings were a teeny bit easier, just because it was easier to hold them with 2 fingers. It wasn't a 2.5 finger job. And funnily enough, the amount of grease that I grabbed that first glob was perfect for it. You see, I don't have that much left over, so I grabbed just the right amount. Well, tiny bit more than just the right amount for all 4 bearings. So easy peasy. This was a couple days later. I got the bearings the one day, right, and then I said we had to wait for the parts. So we got the rotors in, got the seals and the preload and lock nuts and lock washers in, and now we gotta assemble all the bits. And you can't see the laptop there. It's off screen, but I have the laptop open when I do all these jobs. I always have the laptop open on the page that gives me the torque specs for the particular component that I'm working on. So we can set the torque specs to the correct value so stuff isn't just falling out when you're coming down the road. I've seen that. I've literally seen, we had a guy, when I was working at Pep Boys years ago, we had a guy not torque the wheels on a car correctly. Customer takes the car. It was a rotation oil change, is all it was. Guy takes the car, drives down about a half a block, 3/4 of a block down the road. He drives it back, luckily, drove it back, and says, yeah, there's a funny clunking noise and the steering feels off. And we checked it, and yeah, the lug nuts weren't torqued. Some of them were torqued down to 60 or 70, where the torque spec was 100. This bit I wanted to show you guys. I've seen a lot of people where they'll stick a bolt, a nut, or whatever in the socket, flip it upside down and do a thing, and oh, it falls out. So you can see there, put the bolt in, put it in the rotor, kind of at an angle. You don't need to put tape on it. You don't need to put grease on it. You don't need to put a little piece of rag in there to hold it in place. None of that silly business stuff. Sometimes you need to do those things. Sometimes you do, and you can't get away from it because just the way something sits and the space you have. But if it's right in front of you like this on the bench, like, just stick it in the socket, set it kind of at an angle, and it won't fall out. Like, no need to try to stick your finger down in there and try to thread it by hand first, and you know, there's not a whole lot of room in the rotor between the rotor and the hub there. So you know, you do it the way, and it does the thing, and you know, job's a good one. And the oil seals, I pulled them out, cleaned them, and checked them, and funnily enough, the oil seals looked like they were brand new, which is why I think somebody was in there not that long ago. Which is weird, brand new oil seals, but the outer gaskets were not really all that in great shape. which makes me think they reuse them. You can see here we're going to put a nice little glob of grease inside the middle of the hub there. Job's a good one. Me making fake drumming motions at the camera, which I then sped up and they don't make any sense at high speed. So, you know, you guys get to see me having what appears to be a seizure. But there we are, we're putting the hubs back on, and of course, during this whole thing, I keep forgetting, like, a tool. So I stand up and go grab a tool, or I stand up and go grab a rag, or I stand up and go get some brake cleaner. And I was going to talk a minute about the preload in this thing. I mentioned before that the preload wasn't set correctly, as is evidenced by the fact that the grease was not all that old. The rear seal was in pretty good shape. It was pretty new, and the rubber was not cracked. It was still rubber, right? And there was bluing on the bearings, which tells me that they were not tight. Right? Bluing is no grease or not tight, generally speaking. You can get bluing from over tight, but they have to be really preloaded over tight to get bluing like what we saw on the bearings, which I saw on the bearings. You guys didn't actually get to see. And you can see there, I gotta turn the rotor back and forth. I can't tell you how many times I see people where they set the preload, or they are setting the preload on these types of spindles. And they turn the nut until it hits a specified value, and then they put the lock mechanism on, and they're done. You have to turn the rotor. You must spin the rotor to get this. You spin the rotor, and that prelude's going to loosen up as the bearing seats into the race further and further, right? So you turn the nut, you spin the rotor. You turn the nut, you spin the rotor. You do this until the nut no longer frees itself up when you're spinning the rotor. That's kind of how you do it. Then we put the lock washer and the lock nut on, and we put the gasket for the outer hub cover on. Once I go over and grab it, because I keep forgetting to grab things. So the story I'm telling you guys is that I keep it over on the bench so it doesn't get dirty before I put it on. Fresh gasket, fresh surface, you know. That's what we're going with. It's nice clean part. It's not getting grease all over it. Okay. Now that we're all on the same page. And stick everything back together, and I kind of do and I kind of don't like this setup with the little cone, I don't know what you call them, keepers, washers, dilly popper dupers, I don't even know. Not sure exactly what the name of them is, but they're little cone guys. You put the cone guy in, you put a lock washer and the nut on the stud, and you torque it down to the correct torque value, as you will see right here. Correct torque value. And because it's low torque, I can stick the pry bar there against the wheel stud without damaging the stud. If it were higher torque, I would be putting the caliper back on and jamming a screwdriver or an extension in there and jamming, the extension up against the caliper to keep the hub from spinning. Put a little dibbly-dabbly of grease on the face for the washer, for the CV axle there, so that we can torque him correctly. And then we put a little tiny bit of grease on the inside of the cap there, and we kind of smack him on with our dead blow. Not a metal hammer, so we're not damaging the cap. Again, can't tell you how many times I've seen caps with just marred all to heck and back, simply because they couldn't be bothered to just use the right tool to get the thing on or off. Again, torque wrench, torque wrench, torque wrench. Everything you absolutely possibly can, torque wrench. Sometimes there are the rare occasions like this ball joint. There's no way I'm getting a torque wrench in there. If I had an old school torque wrench, the old non-ratcheting torque wrench, and gear wrench setup, the through-hole gear wrench sockets, I absolutely could do that. But I don't have those, so I have to, after years of doing this, you kind of get the feel for, you know, how tight it should be, and you make it tight to around what the spec should be, and then you line up, you know, it's a castle nut, right, for the ball joint, so you line up the hole. And that's what the spec says anyway. It says torque it to this value and then line up the hole for the cotter pin. As long as it's torqued in place and the ball joint's not loose and free, and it's not going anywhere, that's the point. It's like the bearings, right, where it's two cones fitted together. So you torque it down to where the cones are fitted together, not really going anywhere, and you're good to go. You see here I had to pry the inner fender out just a little bit to get the torque wrench out of the hole there, because it was just a little bit tight. The driver's side's tighter than the passenger side is, because the passenger side has the access panel for the intake manifold and the fuel filter. These lower control arm bolts, I just set the camber to 0 because it's all brand new metal, brand new ball joints, brand new, like, everything but the bolts, really. And torque them down. It was like 150 foot-pounds. There's a lot of torque it took to torque them guys down. I'm really hoping the alignment shop used a torque wrench when they torqued them down, but I can almost guarantee they didn't, because not everybody's me. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe using a torque wrench is the crazy man's solution. I don't know. Anyway, we're not gonna get off on one of those asides. We'll put the sway bar in links in, and then we're gonna put the sway bar up. That was fun, because trying to, you know, I didn't want to crawl underneath in the center to hold the thing up while I'm reaching all the way outside. So, you know, putting the sway bar up from one end was an interesting endeavor. It wasn't too hard. Sway bars don't weigh that much. And of course I didn't have the camera pointed in the right spot. Again, this is why it's taken me so long to get this recording out and get this episode edited, is because the freak I did such a bad job this day. It was 2 days or 3 days? 3 days, because it was the cleaning day, the bearing packing day, and then this day putting all the stuff back together. So I don't know. My mind's melting. I'm going crazy. It's such a bad job of filming this stuff. But again, I can't very well claim that I'm doing it correctly unless I'm showing you that I'm doing it correctly. He says, as he's not using a torque wrench to put the sway bar and link nut onto the lower control arm. It's fine. Calibrated hands. That's what we're going with. Calibrated hands. Actually, I don't even remember if the book that I have says anything about the sway bar and link torque. I do know that they are lock nuts. I also know that one side was loose, which explained the noise in the front. The sway bar and links were not tightened to the control arm. And here we got a new set of brake pads, and they're the fancy, you know, ceramic brake pads. Not fancy, they're good ceramic brake pads, right? And it came as a kit, and it had, I swear to God, it had the little clippy spring thing there on the back. It had it. I swear it was there. It was in a little baggie, and then I can't find them. We still haven't found them to this day. I had to go buy another set of those springs to put them in there. I don't know what the heck they did. They're gone. They've disappeared. And then putting the torsion bar bolts back in. This was tiring because, you know, turning a nut to twist a large piece of spring steel rod, 70 millimeters of bolt, which I have no idea how far in rotation that actually is on the cam, because you're some distance away from the center of rotation, so you apply more torque but less movement. I could probably do the math if I weren't lazy, but yeah. Anyway, you can see me stopping a bunch here so I can check the... so the book said you set this amount of distance on threads sticking out of the nut, and then you put it on the ground and you measure the right height and set the right height after that. So that's what you see me doing, is you see me checking, you know, making sure. I didn't actually measure it. I think it was 70 millimeters sticking out or something like that, of the bolt sticking out of the nut. And so I went in there and I looked at it, and 70 millimeters is just over 3 inches. So I was like, we'll just do it about 3.5 inches or so. And I ended up having to tighten them further to set the front ride height to the book anyway, right? So it was fine. It's even if I over tightened them, you just pull it back a little bit, it's fine. But yeah, it was really tiring because you're working against the spring steel there, so it's you're using muscle to turn the bolt every single turn. It's never free, really. But we're getting up to the bit where I have some audio recorded from that day, so I will give you guys to pass try it. And we'll see some stuff about the rear shocks and the rear drums. Here you go. Adjusting the rear drum brakes. As we can see, when I turn this guy, very little resistance to motion. The only resistance I'm really feeling is that in the drivetrain, which tells me the drums need adjusted. And I do notice there's a little bit of oil, something petroleum-like on the drum surface. I don't know what that would be, but we're going to clean it off because we do not want to get petroleum products. Well, I'm not even going to say that. We don't want to get lubricants on our braking system. Spray the outside there. I'm gonna stick him up there. I don't know if you guys can tell that in the video. I'll find out in the cut. But that's all brake dust. But some of this looks like oil for some reason. And I will say, if you were looking for a brake cleaner that does the best job, that you go and you just, you walk into the store, you grab some, you walk out. I'm not going to make any claims to any other solvents and their efficacy. But for ones, you walk into this parts store, you grab a can or two of it, you buy it, you walk out, you're done. AutoZone's house brand has always been the most effective, in my opinion. Is it the best? That's going to be up to a lot of subjectivity, because best is going to be dependent on what your personal requirements are. My requirements for best are not only solvent efficacy, but also price, which means AutoZone is somewhere in the middle, because it is very, very effective at being a solvent, but it is very ineffective at being cost effective. Because they know that theirs is a little bit better and they can charge accordingly, and they do that. The AutoZone house brand is a little bit more expensive, generally speaking, than many other brands of aerosolized brake cleaners. But if I'm going for, I want to use the least amount of solvent on something, I'll get AutoZone's house brand, which apparently they rebranded, because this is what was there, Shop Pro. It's been a long time since I've been in an AutoZone, so I don't know when they switched to this branding, but it cleans like the old school black and orange AutoZone brand, so I'm assuming it's the same manufacturer making it for them. This formulation is the best formulation of brake cleaner I have ever used. You can see I don't even spray all that fast. I don't just put the nozzle all the way down to the ground and YOLO, bro. Because you don't have to. If you need to blast chunks away, then putting the finger all the way down, yeah, it's fine. But with AutoZone's house brand, I don't feel the need to do that. CRC is definitely one of those you want to use the whole thing all the way at all times, otherwise you're not getting any cleaning power out of it, because CRC's formulation is not very good as a solvent. It doesn't break down oils and greases, lubricants, right, very well. It is definitely not AutoZone's formulation. Yeah, there's a little bit of derp cork on the back of this hub here. Oh, probably because that axle seal's leaking a little bit. That's lovely. So we're gonna let the customer know that. Yeah, that's unfortunate. If I remember right though, is this the... Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the super easy axle seals. 4 bolts in the back, pulls this section out, and you just slide the whole axle out, pull the axle out of the hub, replace the seal, bolt it back in. It's not like Chevys, Fords, Dodges, you know, the American vehicles, where you got stupid clips that always break if you're doing anything other than driving down the highway at 45 miles an hour. Can't tell you how many of those stupid clips I've seen broken that destroyed an entire rear end. So many of them. And I don't know, maybe it's the owner's fault, or the operator's fault, or, you know, RTFM or something. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is Toyota's axle system is superior. Oh, these wheel cylinders are a teensy bit aged, but they are dry inside the boots. You'll love to see it. Woohoo! All right, you boy. Okay, so now that we've cleanerated everything off the who's you wants it, stick this guy back on. Oh yeah, there's no contact patch there. So we're gonna grab our handy dandy screwdriver. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's see how far out that brought us. Barely anything. Do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I hear just the teeniest, tiniest, itty bitty bits of dragging. Magnetic screwdriver. I would like it if you were not magnetic. So let's do 1, 2, 3. One, two, three. And of course, these clicks are a bit subjective. Two more clicks. And
we have just a little bit of drag. It's enough that if I spin it and let go, it doesn't continue at all. I am going to be bedding the front brakes in, so I'm going to be getting these guys hot and I'm going to be wearing them a little bit, which is why I'm actually adding one or two more clicks extra of adjustment, because I know I'm going to wear these shoes down just a little bit. So I am putting the adjustment just a smooch over spec. That is intentional. I have done these before where I did not do that. I was like, ah, they're shoes, they're drums, they don't wear that much, it's fine. And then I went and I bedded the front brakes in, or I bedded the brakes because we were replacing all of them. And I had to adjust them again another 2 clicks or so. So I always over adjust the rears by 1 or 2. It doesn't take much. You're not trying to like crank it so the drum barely goes on. You don't want to do that, that's bad. But you give it a little bit extra drag. They're really fine pitched, the adjusters. So you give it a little bit extra drag such that when you get done bedding the brakes, you don't have to pull them back apart. You don't have to put the back end back up in the air and readjust the drums.
And that's all I've got for you folks today. Don't forget to like it, subscribe it, crank it, and rip it. And we'll see you in the next one.